Welcome to BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. We're talking today about a controversial subject. Is the IT department dead? This is based on September issue of IT Now, the BCS membership magazine, where for the first time we had a guest editor, Phil Pavitt, who's CIO at Specsavers. He posed that question. There's 1.18 million people working in IT, so it's an important question just here in the UK. So let's introduce the panel that we have. Obviously, we have Phil Pavitt, CIO of Specsavers. We have Adam Thilthorpe, who's Director of Professionalism at BCS. Welcome, Hello. Adam. We have Louise McCarthy, IT Commercial Director at Specsavers. Welcome, Louise. Hi. And we have Ben Rapp, CEO of Managed Networks. Hi, welcome, Ben. Now, let's just start off, Phil, if we can, with this confluence of issues where people, I think when I got feedback on Twitter and that, kind of saying loss of the IT team, loss of the IT professional. These are not the same things, are they? Could you tell us a little bit more about your ideas?
Yeah, so the concept behind the article, I guess, was a challenge that I think the IT industry has faced for many years, but I've been unwilling to face up to. The IT department itself, as an institution, as an entity, as a traditional role, I think it's dead. I think it needs to reinvent itself. It's not the IT professional, the individual is dead. It's that team, it's that concept. There's some IT group of people facilitating some activity in the business. Yes. I think it hasn't evolved, it hasn't changed, it hasn't really met the need of the modern business. It's being bypassed, as you can read in the article. I give a few examples why I think that is. But the IT professional, in fact, I think has a bigger role, a deeper role, if only its leadership of the IT can rediscover both their and the team's role. I think the IT department is dead, or pretty close to dead. I think the IT professional is a critical member of any company, any organisation, any enterprise.
Okay, well, that's a comfort straight off, isn't it? Because if you just read the headline, you might worry about your job.
Of course, I'm talking about my own job as well, so I don't want to write off my own career, but I just think we've got to rediscover ourselves. We've been a dead men walking, we've been moaning that everybody else doesn't like us, and yet we've been unwilling, as most other company departments have been, to reinvent ourselves, so we shouldn't be surprised when we're seen as irrelevant. Okay,
so now here's the first counter-argument, because we've had feedback on this already. Largely split between positive and negative, very little in the middle. So here's some of the thoughts on the negative side. Stephen Bowes-Phipps wrote in and said, very few business units have positive experience of maintenance. He's talking about patching and looking after the software and so on and so forth. They don't understand the underlying infrastructure. They ignore the Data Protection Act. They shy away from critical updates. And because they monkey about a little bit with their software, they can't get critical updates done. Hence, we need an IT department. What do we feel about that? Perhaps we could come to Louise initially on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the statement of we don't always have experience in the maintenance of software, I think if there isn't an IT department, that probably could be the nervousness around, well, who's going to manage that piece? But I think a lot of software companies today try and push to the business side, the desire to sell upgrades and functionality upgrades. So for Oracle, for example, the next release is out there before we've just let the paint dry on the previous one, but obviously to make money. But if they're into the business and selling and saying that you need this new product, we need to challenge that. And I think from a commercial prospect, I mean, I would say, do you really need that new software? Do you really need that new functionality? And is there a business case to justify that? And a lot of companies are saying, well, you're out of support. For example, Oracle will be saying, well, you're going out of support. You've got to take this new functionality in terms of maintenance and support. But there's not. There's other alternatives. You can look at other products or other suppliers in the market that can help you with your maintenance support, which potentially could be cheaper. For example, Rimini Street.
I'm not sure, because I think sometimes with when we jump straight in, we talk about the IT department when Phil was discussing it, we jump straight in whether or not your patches are up to date. Now, patches being up to date is a great thing with regards to information security. It's probably the first thing GCHQ will ask you, and it will wipe out 90% of the problems. That's it's a good idea. It's a really good idea. But I think with me is running IT within an organisation isn't good enough anymore. If that's all you're going to do, if you're going to keep the lights on, that's a highly commoditised vision of IT, which can be best done, and it may be done elsewhere, i.e. not even within the company. And then when you say, so you move on from that, if you're really good at running IT, you might be able to change. You might be able to change the organisation. And I think even that isn't good enough. I think changing your organisation is good enough to stand still. But I think it's up to IT departments, and whatever that might mean, and maybe a failure of IT departments and IT leaders to dominate this discussion is the emergence of digital as a concept, a chief digital officer. It's almost a point of sort of perhaps the CIOs fail to dominate the conversation with regards to saving the business, because I think that's what IT has to do. It's no good, run it, yes, change it, fine, but actually you've got to save the organisation that you're working for, because we're talking about Cisco Live earlier in the year. The chief executive said most Fortune 500 companies in the States won't be in existence because they're going to be disrupted. I'm trying to look for a better word, but they are going to be disrupted, or they're going to fail in the digitisation of their own business.
I think that's an important word, Adam, is the disruptive piece. Disruptive, I think, is a big word in terms of it's a different way of doing things, and being a disruptive IT department in terms of looking for innovation and doing things different. It's not about just changing. It's not just changing what we've got today, but it's being totally disruptive and looking for different ways of doing things in terms of the innovation and the new ideas to help the business grow.
I'm going to come in here and be slightly controversial. I don't like this word disruptive. I think it gets overused. I think it's one of those sexy tech words that get attached to venture capital propositions. Ultimately, I think this is about a pivot. Historically, IT departments have been about supporting IT. They've been about infrastructure and kit and toys, and they tend to attract the kind of people who like infrastructure and kit and toys. And the arguments about patching and infrastructure maintenance are arguments about kit and toys. What IT departments need to do is pivot to support users in using the technology that's available, a lot of which, from an infrastructure perspective, will be out there, will be outsourced, will be cloud. And so it becomes about focusing on helping the users address exactly this issue that they don't know how to and shouldn't know how to do the technology bit. They know how to use it. And so ultimately, we have a responsibility in IT from a cybersecurity perspective. But I disagree with you that it's 90% patches, it's 90% people. Yeah, the big risk is human negligence, stupidity, ignorance, call it what you like. Yeah. And that's a training issue, it's a human communication issue. By the same token, a big function of IT, whether it's internal or outsourced, is effectively administration. It's doing for users things they could do for themselves, but it's more efficient if somebody else does it, in the same way that chief execs have PAs who run their diaries. Of course, the chief exec could do it himself, but it's easier to have an IT department that resets your password and sorts out your folder permissions, even if you know how to do it, because you've got another job to be doing. And I think it's understanding that it's our job to help the users get the best out of the jigsaw that the business builds. It's also our job to help the business build that jigsaw, to pick the right technologies. And that's perhaps where the disruption comes in. But we need to be working with the business to help the business disrupt itself, if you want to use that word. Yeah. It's not our job to go and go, no, you need to change and do this way.
No.
Isn't the question that was posed, I guess, to me, symbolises the whole debate I tried to start, in that if we think the business needs to worry about patching, haven't we rather lost our way? I mean, very little software these days needs patching, it self-patches. In fact, I slightly disagree. I think that IT departments need to forget all the old stuff it used to do. Even the business can well run its own IT. I'm rather shocked, actually, if I was a business leader, I haven't dispensed and bought my own IT directly. It's cheaper anywhere else than actually using my own internal IT department. So I've got to change my own IT department to be cheap, quick, usable, and not do any patching. Now,
sure,
I exaggerate very slightly, of course, because there's always something to do. Yeah. But that's not the first thing the business should say. Oh, who's going to do the patching?
No, should say, but that's what I'm saying.
Oh, and you do patching. Okay, whatever. That kind of is like almost a lights on bit, to your point.
But that's something that's out there. That's not. This is the point, right? Businesses shouldn't really be, unless they can make a very good scale case for it, in the business of procuring and running their own infrastructure, because it's boring and commoditized, and you're better off buying it from someone who's got the ability to scale it out across multiple enterprises. The businesses should be focusing whatever IT resource they have internally on maximising value of business knowledge. If you've got somebody who's an exchange expert in your organisation, that's a complete waste, because there are exchange experts out there that you can share with other people. What you need is people who are expert in what it is you do, so that they can say, yes, but if we did this with this workflow like this, the business process would work better, because that's the thing. You can't bring somebody in from the outside to do.
So that's the value add piece that the business is looking for. They're not interested in the non-core activities in terms of keeping the lights on and maintenance, and that's a bit in terms of understanding, is the IT department dead? I think it's probably scales of size that you, in the IT department, you only have your core skilled people that are going to add value to the business. I call it a bookends model.
But the danger is you're splitting IT from business, which is what IT has always wanted to do. So when you go into a part of the business and they talk about, let's talk about an ERP system, they talk about SAP, that's the point where IT has failed in its job, because they're referring to the software instead of the functionality. And actually businesses can begin to exploit IT without knowing it's IT. They know it's IT, but they don't actually call it it's IT. They exploit what it is. IT is in the core of it. We almost need to be the silent partner as well as the noisy partner, because it's part of what they do. They do their business knowledge and then IT. I disagree with that.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they do their business knowledge and effectively somebody else does IT. If you think about, if we're talking, it depends what you mean by IT, right? We used to have an IT-IS division, right? So as far as I'm concerned, IT is the boring stuff that keeps the lights on and turns the handle. That's what delivers, if you like, delivers the desktop experience, right? IS is the systems behind it that are more personalised to your organisation. So if you're using an ERP system, it's your implementation of that ERP system. It's the fit between that ERP system and your business. You need technologists in that space because there is a translation job to do and there is a customization job to do. But if you're still worrying about which servers to buy and where to put them and all this kind of thing internally as a day-to-day activity, you've missed the point, because you can commoditize that and effectively rent it out there in the space. And so it's getting this focus on identifying the right business systems and using them effectively within the business. And that means you need more business analysts, you need more people whose job is to understand the business and then make suggestions. So they understand the business, they understand the technology, and they make the bridge. And fewer people who actually do the implementing, because that shouldn't be an internal role. That's something you can go and get.
So do we be disruptive here and say, well, the IT department instead, so it's get rid of the word IT and have another name and recreate IT and call it something else?
Isn't that what Chief Digital Officer's all about? You know, that's this portmanteau phrase, digital, that just seems to encompass,
so what is it?
A big pile.
Let me just bring in another common objection we had then to Phil's comments about the individuals involved. Is there a core knowledge, is there a core body of knowledge and skills that an IT person requires that can't be picked up by a relatively intelligent person? And is there a unique way of thinking about problem solving that can't be picked up quickly? His contention is, if the answer to both of those is none or no, then IT can be commoditized, but he thinks it's yes.
But so that's not really the point, is it? This is the same point as the point about the CEO's PA. Of course, an intelligent person can pick up a lot of this stuff. A lot of what we do isn't rocket science. Nothing I do in cybersecurity is rocket science at all, because it's all policies about behaving intelligently. But somebody has to do it, and if they're doing it, they haven't got the time to do something else. So ultimately, it's about saying, if you're really, really good at this stuff, you're probably adding the most value to the business by doing that. If you're actually fundamentally a marketing manager, shouldn't you be spending your time marketing? And the more time you spend understanding how to configure the CRM system, the less time you're spending using it to go and drive sales.
But isn't that what we're saying? We're trying to get rid of the non-core, and we're looking for thought leadership. We're looking for IT people that are going to give thought leadership to the business that's sort of like out of the normal thinking in terms of we're just keeping the lights on, just doing something radically different. This is the thought leadership.
It's not that you still need somebody keeping the lights on, it's just they don't have to work for you.
Different type of skills.
This is something you buy as a commodity. And you do need your leaders in all of your business areas to be digitally aware. You can't have a marketing manager who doesn't know what a CRM system is or have a reasonable idea how they work. And then you need people who've pivoted, and their main focus is to understand what's out there and what it could do, and to go around and talk to the business people and say, tell me what your strategy is, tell me what you're doing, here's what I think. I understand enough about what you do to give you some guidance, and then collectively let's agree what we're going to do.
That's a new behaviour. Bringing technology, bringing your understanding of technology and how you might exploit it for the benefit of the business is a skill set that people are often looking for, but when you find it, it's like gold dust, because it's speaking the language of the organisation, understanding what the organisation is trying to achieve and its objectives, and then applying your knowledge, being horizon scanning, understanding what's coming next. But it's not just about the tech that's used, it's about the influence and impact on behaviour. So we're talking about what my customers might be doing, what is the impact, whether or not, if Zipcar is an alternative to ownership of very expensive bits of metal that may or may not have emissions grade at certain whatever. So that's a different alternative in how you might go about a car purchase, because the behavioural change is what I did at destination, not the status with which I arrived at my destination. So bringing some of those insights back into the organisation is not traditionally where a chief executive would look to a CIO or that team to understand what is the impact. But I would say to save the business, you've got to.
Absolutely, but I think what's interesting is that what we see here is a division between how smaller enterprises behave, and always have, and how larger enterprises behave. If you look, we mostly serve medium-sized businesses, and most of them don't have internal IT departments, because that's what we do. And their explicit instruction to us is that they want us to do the strategy piece, to tell them what they could do differently, to tell them what's out there, because they haven't got the horsepower internally to go and look for it. I think what's dead is the large IT department in the large organisation that sees itself as not having that role and just being a kind of inward-facing kit wrangling team. So it's about taking what small businesses have always expected from their service providers and scaling it. And you don't necessarily scale it by using external service provision, but you scale it by looking at the role definition, saying this is about business leadership and it's about enabling. And I prefer enabling to disrupting.
Yeah.
It's about saying, here's something we could do better or differently that's coming out of something I understand about technology, allied to what I understand about the business that I work for.
But that's why it's so important, I think, for large-scale IT to understand the conundrum, because market-dominant positions, the thing about market-dominant positions is that you're usually last to know that the world has changed. So you need to get, and then you go bust. You have a record year and then you go bust. So they need to get that sort of that talent on board in their organisations who are able to make that sort of challenge, to understand what are we here fundamentally to do and to drive. And I'm sure if MasterCard and Visa went back a few years and tried to figure out how they might have done PayPal originally, the market share shift might have been spectacularly different.
Sure.
So I'm not sure.
I think, large organisations do have barriers that smaller ones don't in terms of their ability to make those kind of shifts. This is the other problem with disruption, that we can all say, oh, look, and take Uber as an example, right?
Yeah.
You used to run a corporate taxi account, it was spending hundreds of thousands of pounds. Now you use Uber and it's cheaper, and isn't that great, right? Sounds marvellous. But then you start to think about some of the security implications, the control and accounting implications, all of the things that will affect you if you're trying to wrangle a couple of 100,000 people that you don't have to worry about if you're wrangling a couple of hundred people. So there is a danger in extrapolating, I think, from small and medium into scale. But it's still important to see that this pivot away from tech and into being business and person facing is inescapable, because that's the way that the users are dragging us by doing it themselves in the shadow.
It put me in mind, Phil, of your approach at Specsavers and what you actually call your IT team. I'm thinking about this being person oriented rather than...
Yeah, and I think the fundamental question that IT, and we're always prescribing a set of answers here based, but people listening to this or reading about this, well, it's all very personal to wherever they are. I think any IT department in a medium or a large company, I think, has to reset what it thinks the people who are given the money to it, its salaries, its investment, what it really wants. Most businesses have already voted with their feet. They've initiated programs or projects, and then IT gets involved a bit later. It's demonstrating they see it as and there is a role for you to play, not at the decision-making piece, almost only at the execution piece. And IT have lived in the execution space for 20, 25 years and been relatively happy with it. They like the moaning about it, they like the positive, they like the legacy systems, all of that. We're actually, and to the points already made, we need to think about what the business really wants from us. It may be very user-centric, it may be very customer-centric, they are quite separate. It may be actually the thought leadership, but actually it's not true for anybody and true for everybody. I think IT teams, and the reason for having the article and having this conversation, is to encourage leaders, IT to sit back and say, so what does my business, what has it become? It might just expect thought leadership. It might just expect me to find all the commodity players and be the broker. It might expect me just to disband completely. It might expect 100. But have we ever stopped and thought, rather than just doing the in tray of execution? And I guess that challenge is going to be different for everybody, because there's government bodies, there are public sector bodies, there are sort of local authorities, there's private sector companies, large and small. It's going to be different for each. But the common theme is, are you now what your business now needs, what your business now wants, what your customer base now requires? I'm not sure IT are very willing to have that conversation. They're probably a bit frightened of the answer, to be honest, because that answer must mean change. Because if it didn't, then why is IT having such a bad day, such a bad reputation? Why do most CEOs in the FTSE 100 believe that investment is disappointing when they get the answer to what their money they place at the allegedly at the IT expert's door? Be they direct or indirect. And I think that's a challenge.
I think the other challenge is IT actually challenging the business. So it's not a matter of just saying the business has come and said that this is the business problem they want to solve, and part way through that process the business have probably already identified how they want that problem solved. I think it's actually pushing back to the business and saying, no, you don't really need to do that, or there's a different way of doing it, or you can reuse that. And I think IT generally feels a little bit nervous of upsetting their customers, or being perceived of upsetting the customers, but probably the customers actually want that challenge. They want you to come back and say, well, there's a different way, you don't really need that, or you could reuse or change your business process rather than just adding a new bit of IT in.
I think that's right, but the challenge they want is that sort of discussion rather than the no.
Yes.
Because I think that's where some of those experiences, and why shadow IT and why people go around, is because, I've got various examples, but I've got this latest piece of kit. I want to have an environment that I'm used to actually running my social life, my home and domestic life, and I come into work and I find that I'm unable to have a similar experience. I want the same
But
experience.
we're a victim of our own publicity. So I spend time, all the CIOs who talk about legacy systems, the complexity, how slow they are, how interconnected. So of course, eventually, because they put up as an excuse at board meetings, they put up as an excuse at investment committees and so on, eventually the business goes, no, you're right, actually. That stuff you're running is really old and real. I'm going to find someone else or another company because you're dealing with the old rubbish. And thank you for doing that, by the way. I really appreciate something. And we go, I'm a bit upset now because you've invited a digital guy to join or a girl to join. And no. You said you want to do legacy. Legacy is really bad. Thank you for doing it. In fact, here's a badge. Work for finance. Here's a badge. Please carry on doing it. But I'm going to find someone exciting to do the other stuff.
Yeah.
We become a victims of our own moaning. Now, if we call legacy engines, which is my argument, heritage, because that's the heritage that got the business where it was, treated it properly, we are victims of our own sort of almost publicity about how hard things are to do. People now believe us, and now we're upset they believe us, because that means they've changed their mind about our relevancy to the future.
I think it's also that we aren't very good at communicating why things are hard to do. And this comes to this small versus large argument to an extent. One of the things that we worry about from a shadow IT perspective are the sort of hidden security risks associated with people, and particularly the sort of bring your own system as opposed to bring your own device stuff. When people sign up to T's and C's they haven't read, that then hand over company IP to some random, cloud hosting business. That stuff's quite boring, and it's quite difficult to get users to appreciate that it matters. And so you end up being seen just as King Canute holding your hands up and saying, just stop do only what we say you can do. And we need to pivot that and say, look, no, we will find a way for you to do this thing you want to do that protects the business. And we need to constantly make it clear that we're protecting the business. And I think our big issue is that we struggle to make this bridge. We struggle to find, particularly leadership in IT, that is credibly able to talk about the business, that doesn't end up being slapped down because what it's saying is hopelessly naive from a commercial perspective. So we need to either develop a much better commercial understanding in our senior IT people, or get some senior commercial people and teach them enough IT that they can show us how it's done.
But that comes back to the original point you made. IT needs to be in the business, because where IT is in the business, it doesn't follow the same IT thinking. Because the business is about yes, IT is about no. So the only way to find out whether your IT is genuinely in the business, if you'll find your IT leadership have got the yes mentality. It's rare. But actually, that then means they must be in the business. They must have finally grasped the business concept. Because it's yes, now how do we work it out? Not automatically no, which is what IT has been known for the longest years.
And I agree with you on the IT commercial point. I mean, exactly what my article was proposing, that we do actually need to make sure that on the leadership team there is IT commercial, but the IT commercial is not just procurement as you see it. It is actually going and adding value. It's actually proactively looking at our legacy, looking at the cost of our legacy systems, and actually coming up with a business case and being proactive to the business to say, we've got all of these legacies, digitally, innovation, or there's these three different ways that we can actually help you proactively, but actually it's going to save the money for the business as well. And it becomes a cycle then, because you're decommissioning your legacy, you're coming up with something brighter and newer for the business, and they're happier and their performance levels are going up and it's cost less. You've freed up for more money for the business to go and do some more innovation. So that's where the IT commercial team and the leadership board actually get that broader, holistic view of what's going on within IT and help the business.
Absolutely. And I think that the key thing is that if a suggestion for some piece of innovation that will deliver a real improvement to the customer experience or the company's bottom line is coming out of IT, then IT ought at least to be saying, not only do we think this would be a good idea, but we believe it's deliverable and the numbers stack up. As opposed to the business coming to IT and saying, why don't we do this? And 15 people sitting around finding different reasons why it won't work, or will cost too much, or will take too long. So if we are the ones who are doing the proposing, then we have a reasonable chance of getting a happy customer.
Yeah.
And it is a technical thing to say, but I would say if CIOs really are brave, try and run a whole month and not use the word legacy in a presentation, in a conversation. Run a whole month and say anything you want, I'll build it into this system, which is the old legacy system, because actually we just automatically assume what we have is not good enough. I ran in government some of the oldest systems that run the infrastructure, financial infrastructure of the UK, and I was told we had to swap those out. They're still running today, they're 40 years old, but we did some technical stuff around them that took modern stuff into them. So it's an automatic no if it's more than 12 months old. Well, just try and be different for a month. You might surprise yourself.
But it's also looking at the facts, isn't it? It's actually looking at the data. So I hear what you're saying in terms of don't use the word legacy and you can add to it or change rather than keep adding new to it. But it is actually the cost of legacy versus where new technology is, and the cloud-based things are far cheaper.
Heritage.
And
But you can make the engine on which they run much cheaper. It would really disrupt the IT industry, supply industry, and shock them if we didn't buy one new application in 12 months in the UK. Because they change what they're selling us.
That's disruptive.
But you know what? All IT people do is, that's an idea, I'll go and buy something new.
Yeah.
For 12 months, we shouldn't buy a thing.
Yeah, okay.
And let's see what all the big suppliers then do. They'll change their pricing structures, they'll change their engines, and they'll fit more in rather than leapfrog generational stuff. It's impractical suggestion, of course it is. But we don't, as buyers or consumers, we are never acting as the customer. We always act as the victim to take on board what was sold. Then we just sell the same message to the business, who then believe the story. Then they cut out the middleman. So, well, if you're doing it through the third party, I'll just miss out IT and buy it direct myself. Because I don't understand your bit you're doing. You're doing that legacy crap, right? So carry on doing that. So actually, we shouldn't buy anything for a year. It'd be cracking.
I think there's two challenges you set there. Let's just reiterate those. Don't buy anything for a year. Don't use the word legacy for a month.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to use the word heritage during that
I'd
month?
use the word heritage.
Okay.
Because remember, so I take my own company. We have systems that might be creaking a bit. But let's be honest, we've built ourselves from nothing to something almost. This has been 30 years. It's not a legacy system with all the negative connotation. It has built one of the most powerful optical retail businesses in the globe. It's a heritage. It's something to be proud of. All the IT department go around, it's a bit rubbish, right? Well, actually, it hasn't been till now. Now it's a little flaky. Got to work on it. Just be careful. The terminology I find quite interesting.
But this is also part of this classic IT behaviour that newer is always better and shinier is always more exciting, isn't it?
It never is, unfortunately.
I was involved years and years and years ago with an effort to replace Sabre, which is the airline booking system, with something that was all GUI and mouse-driven. That was very exciting, and failed completely. And it failed completely because no GUI and mouse interface could ever keep up with those well-trained travel desk people typing away like this while talking to the customer and doing some incredibly complex routing. Using ridiculous acronyms that only they knew. And that's because the industry is built around doing it that way, and there wasn't actually a customer experience improvement for delivering something that just fit with the then paradigm.
Yeah.
So we need to think about whether the upgrade or new system or whatever we're doing is actually going to deliver something at the business end, or whether we're just ticking some boxes around staying up to date and not having to deal with technology that our mates laugh at us about.
And that was back to my point. And that was back to my point. The functionality upgrades and software houses keep doing it, and then we think we've got to buy it because we think we need it. But is it really a business problem we're trying to solve? And looking at the facts, is there a cost benefit associated to it?
So can we perhaps move on to thinking about the individual people here? So there's an individual IT professional watching this now. Just one little comment, by the way, that we had before we even produced this magazine. The IT team are frantically protecting their perceived elevated status by saying no by default, which seems to sum up a lot of things you were just saying there. I'd just like to...
IT team something elevated status. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
The person who wrote it probably thought that.
Well, it's good to be confident, isn't it?
Disruption coming there.
I'd like to talk about the individuals. Now, this then comes down to getting people into roles. So I'd like to talk a little bit about IT recruitment, which is a subject that we covered during this series of articles that were produced in IT Now. And let me just show that for the camera again. Yeah, there it is. Look, that's the special edition. If you'd like one, please let me know. Now, IT recruitment, there's a minimum of three sides to this, aren't there? There's the requirement that a business has and how they communicate that. There's the individual who often feel they're not looked after by business or IT recruitment consultants. And then there's the IT recruitment consultants who perhaps don't feel they're briefed very well by business. Now, this is going to be a crucial aspect to get right if we're going to elevate an IT person into a genuinely engaged business person. So what are the issues there, and what perhaps should we be doing to address them? Thoughts? Adam, it's a big question, isn't it? So we'll come to Adam.
Thank you. It's a very big question. And I don't think it's working particularly well for all parties. I think IT recruiters want to have a genuine conversation around what capability strategy the organisation is running, but they only get asked the question of, I need 2 BAs by Friday. So that doesn't work for them. The people who are in the process, and that could be contractors or it could be people who are looking for full-time and permanent employment, have to fit, so they know that they're going to be scanned with certain buzz terms or whatever that's happening in the industry right there and then, rather than talking and projecting about some of the issues that we've been discussing. And the employer themselves gets shortchanged because they've got both short and long-term issues. Short-term issues is finding and identifying enough talent to fill vacancies. There are vacancies out there, But what does good look like? How do we have a third-party endorsement of what good looks like? How do I understand what it is that I've just acquired with regards to talent? It often takes me quite a long time to understand what it is. Even if you're a company like IBM has been around for a very long time and has very clear processes of how to draw talent in, it still takes a certain amount of time to understand what it is that you've just acquired. So it doesn't seem to be working particularly well for all parties and all concerned. But we have a massive issue. We know we have a skills and capability shortage. We're talking about innovation. We're talking about creativity at a very high level. And we need to be drawing people through, understand what the organisations are trying to achieve, and can exploit technology, digital, IT, whatever you want to call it, to meet that end, to meet that requirement. And if what I say is right, that you want to save the business, well, it's quite a highfalutin concept on week one, day one when you join an organisation. And we've already had a discussion around trying to understand fully the nature of the task and the problem. And you're coming into organisations that are disenfranchised with what's happened in the past. I'm already going round people. Maybe I need to, so me as a candidate, maybe I need to call myself something slightly different. The skills I bring to the table are the same, but actually I might have to go about it. I have to market myself in a completely different fashion. So having a commonality of language is important to understand what skills and capability. You know, we use Sophia, but there are, you know, that's a good starting point. But how you take that person, other frameworks are available. But how you take that talent and put that in an organisation and nurture it and grow it. And I think you need a multi-tiered and blended approach to that.
So Adam, in your point of saying that there is a shortage of the right skills, do we feel that that is a result of the universities and the colleges not educating the youngsters in terms of the forward thinking, the thought leadership in terms of the new technology? We're talking about having thought leadership here and having the right skills in our IT organisation to do that piece rather than doing the non-core activity. But how do we get the universities and the colleges to actually get the students actually trained in that way?
I don't know. I think there is some points around the new curriculum has come through. Has come through in primary, secondary school education, and that's going to have a real impact. That's quite a long game with regards to employment in the UK. But actually, if you're looking at innovation, IT, and thought leadership happening not far from here at sort of Shoreditch and some of these areas, it's happening right now. So the careers into some of these organisations are changing and different. I think a growth of apprenticeships is particularly interesting as to what that might mean for a blend of talent that's coming through.
Apprenticeships definitely. I mean, we run an apprentice scheme, and it's working for us because the school leavers and university leavers that we get may have technical skills that are useful, but they lack a great deal of life experience that we need in order to serve our customers. And we find if we get the apprentices, then we're expecting to have to provide that guidance as well as the technical training. Whereas if we're hiring someone at vast expense through a recruiter, we want them to be a productive asset on day one. And when we find that there's a massive gap on the kind of business side of their understanding and we have to plug that before they can go out and earn money, that's a problem for us. But I think I was wincing a little bit at the Shoreditch thing because I think there's a danger with the way we're currently viewing digital, that we're producing a vast number of coders. At least that's what we think we're doing. We're teaching everyone to write Python and we're teaching everyone to write, whatever the sexy thing is today. When what we need is not so much people who can actually cut code as people who understand what's involved in cutting code and understand how that relates to business.
Yeah. Well, the curriculum is about computational thinking.
Yes.
And you can actually do that, and you can start that at primary school with a piece of paper and a pencil. You don't need a lot of equipment. It's about computational thinking. But I think innovation.
I think what we need to do is to stop in education siloing IT in the same way and say instead, no, this is about understanding business. If you want to have a job, you have to understand business. If you want to have any kind of senior job, you really have to understand business. IT is an intrinsic part of business. It's increasingly, part of a homogenous whole. It's not some heterogeneous little box that you can label off and hire people to go and do.
I agree, because if you're someone, myself, I'm a qualified accountant, and my qualifications, I had to take in business, I had to take in law, I had to take in quite a lot of other areas. Are we thinking at the moment that in colleges and universities it's just pure IT that the students are educated with, and perhaps they need the broader aspect in terms of legal, a bit more commercial, a bit more business understanding, so they become this all-rounded thought leadership type skills? And maybe that's something where the universities and colleges probably need upskilling.
I don't think IT people should come into the business through IT.
No, I agree.
Businesses should not recruit anybody from IT directly into the company unless they're a special skill at a very senior level. Therefore, you need them as a finished product. Most IT people should come from somewhere else in the business. It's a secondary route. But to go back to your first fundamental question, if you start looking at recruitment in the market, you get the same old people turning up to the same old interviews from the same old recruiters with the same old CVs, and people buy it. at increasing day rates. So something is fundamentally wrong with this equation, because nothing is breaking that circle. And what I find quite fascinating, I think it's primarily down to CIOs and IT leaders being exceptionally lazy in their planning. It is, oh bugger, I need 2 people by Friday.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you probably knew that 6 months ago, 4 months ago. Businesses, unless they're in a hugely disruptive space and a hugely competitive space, are really having to react that fast. I mean, fast is probably a few months, but CIOs are making decisions for days. I needed them last week. And therefore, we get the same old faces at the same old rates with the same old... So we actually are the victims of our own failure to be really good leaders. Other parts of the businesses actually work out where they're going, their planning, their investment, their cycle, their needs. They're using both tools and intelligence to do that. IT rarely does it, gets caught short, gets the wrong people in. Then the business gets disappointed by the results. Then the business says, try to get that person myself. And so it just goes in this huge cycle of having the wrong people.
Or wrong people, do we even need the people?
Yeah.
Well,
Because I think
that's a fair point.
Historically IT departments have just grown and grown and grown. And do we, again, the IT commercial function does that challenge to say, do you really need it? What's your supply and demand? Have you got productivity measures to say that that person's not fully loaded and therefore they could be picking up an extra piece of work?
I wonder how many IT directors sit around thinking, you know what, if I was building this IT department for the business as it is now, I wouldn't start from here. And actually, I'd have a smaller number of smarter people doing cleverer things. But this is what I've ended up with, and the cost of change is significant. And it's much harder.
But you have to make that change, don't you?
Yes.
Someone has to stop that merry-go-round. It's difficult to stop it because the business are sucking, it's almost like a drug to them, but someone has to make it. And I said in the article, you know, we are awash with people who are on 1 month's notice. So I walk into companies in my career, and of course most of the knowledge is walking around with a 1 month notice. And that is the IP of your company, of your IT of your company. And everything that's acceptable. Really? We should be a teams of subject matter experts, long-term employees, long-term succession plan, and most people that come through the business. Now, you can't get that overnight. It's a 2 or 3 year plan. But if you don't start it now, you won't see it in 3 years. Now, it's really upsetting to recruiters and temp agencies and contracting agencies, but actually that's what business is fundamental. Because they say, if you're an IT professional advisor to me and you rent someone to advise me, I'll just miss you out. I'll go straight to the rent, because actually that seems I don't understand what the middleman is. You also don't take me serious enough to have a permanent person. You've sent me a rented person. That changes yet again the image of the relevancy of an IT department or team or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that that is about the difference between the generalist and the specialist, and that you know, ultimately your CIO needs to be a mile wide and an inch deep, and understand as broadly as he or she can the business universe and the technology that's available. That doesn't mean that he or she needs to be a subject matter expert in implementing a specific cloud strategy, and you can rent such a person to come in and do that for the 3 months of the implementation or the trial or the discussion or whatever it is, but you need to know it's there. And I think this is really the skill that we need. We need people who know what's there and have as little orthodoxy as they can manage. So they look with unjaded eyes at the whole picture of what you could do with technology. They do that from a business perspective. They understand what the business is trying to achieve and what the customers want. And then they go and find the right people who are expert in something much more narrow and say, right, come and tell me how this would work for us.
But the failure is they get the expert in. If you're a brand new area, I can understand why you might get some singular and short-term deep intervention of deep skills. But they come in, they do their thing and go, and was bereft after they've left as we were before they joined.
But that's just
Because
rubbish project briefing, isn't it?
We do
You need
nothing
to include
about including those skills and that knowledge. Because if you're going to choose a cloud base, you don't want it just for 3 months to start. You want it forever. So who is going to be that long-term, permanent subject matter expert in that space? That's the challenge I think we all face.
And I think it's going back to your point. So if we'd had an opportunity to have a greenfield site in terms of our organisational structure, we wouldn't be where we are today. But how do we break that cycle and basically say, well, we've got 500 people and we realistically think we've just grown that through not having good governance and controls. So how do we get back to an organisation that's fit for purpose? Back to, I guess, the Phil's point in terms of, is the IT department dead, and getting it down to much slimmer core people. So how do you do that? There's 2 ways of doing that. You could actually go and say, well, what's the strategic objectives of the business, and therefore what's the IT, and therefore getting a target operating model, redesign it, and you can go for a restructuring. The other way of doing it is the slower burn rate, but introducing governance and controls and facts and data and challenge to everything you do. And that's where the IT commercial department actually can help with that as well. So I think then it's moving from where we are today. So how do we get to somewhere good? And it's one of those 2 ways.
And I think the danger is, and this is where the whole heritage thing comes in, doing the big restructure risks damaging your ability to operate the heritage. doing the shiny new thing risks ending up with two IT departments, one of which is shiny and new reporting into a CDO, and one of which is old and legacy and, heritage and reporting into a CIO. And somehow you have to avoid that and allow people to go on a journey from being an old school DP operator into being a shiny new business focused IT advisor. And you have to help them do that because they are the ones who retain, exactly as Phil said, the knowledge, the IP that drives the IT in your business. So if you just sack them all, you'll suddenly turn around and go, oh, God, we can't do this important COBOL update. We better go and hire a bunch of expensive contractors to do something we could have done ourselves 3 months ago.
And my challenge with BCS and to add on continually over the years has been, so what is the BCS doing to help this? Because we're having this conversation, in a professional envelope of the BCS, but I notice the BCS are relatively silent for many years on this subject, because actually the facilitation they can give to us as a professional body to help answer some of these questions, to help facilitate that transfer, that journey, to help move CIOs from yesterday to tomorrow. I've seen many organisations split their IT department into today and the tomorrow Inc. So today Inc. and tomorrow. And if you're in the today Inc., you're like, I think my career must be finished, right? Because it's just a whole wrong thinking, to your point. Yeah. And the BCS professionalisation of our industry is about helping people make that journey, be they a student in the first or second year at school, be it through to the person like me at the end of their career in IT. That transition is forever going on. The professional body has a part to play in that.
Absolutely right. So the most obvious change, which is the long-term game, is the introduction of the new curriculum, which happened a year ago. But what we're doing with organisations such as Specsavers and others is this organisational membership piece, where we're trying to bring these debates, bring membership to life, and understand that a discussion, a debate around professionalism isn't oak-panelled in its agenda. This is about innovation and creativity, and whether or not you're going to remain relevant, not just you as an individual, but your organisation, or those organisations that you might aspire to work with. So we must be a conduit to bring those debates together, to form them, but also do something about it after the fact. And that might be through various grades and standards, but again, standards that can drive the adoption of this new thinking, because it's about what's coming next. It's not, best practice is quite good about doing today's stuff relatively well and building on the heritage and mistakes that have been made previously. But next practice is about doing tomorrow's stuff first. And that's both for you as an individual as much as it is for your organisation. When we do things really, really well, we're a conduit and we bring people together to have these sorts of debates. But we need to do much, much more. And we've got to be able to reach out to much larger parts of the profession, the industry, and do something positive about it, but we're up for that.
And I think what it is it's looking, I think going back to what is the IT department going to be now? What is it? What are we going to call it? And then working back to say, what would an ideal target operating model and a standard organisation look? So what would be the roles and what would be the descriptions? Then to the Sophia framework, then how do we change the roles and description of those roles to make them fit that world? And then the next one back is going back to the universities and the colleges and making sure that people are trained in that way. It's sort of that whole life cycle.
I think it's also, this is something where certainly the Professionalism Board at BCS is trying to do something, and it's around vendor neutral qualifications that are part of your professional development, so they're post or absent university qualifications, that incorporate an expectation that you function at a management level with a business understanding. So there's things like CITP, and we're talking about inflecting that or perhaps diversifying it.
Yeah.
And it has to reflect your ability to engage with the business, and it's trying not so much to reflect your engagement with particular shiny bits of tin.
And that's right, and it's also where ultimately, from a membership point of view, as much as just as an IT professional out there, where ultimately does that responsibility lie? We have a responsibility to society to make sure that we are providing products and services fit for purpose, that, to your point with guys, no one needs to know everything about information security, but they have to be able to trust enough to be able to do what it is they're trying to achieve. And we have a responsibility, either that's wearing people out because they're constantly looking at their phone at the weekends and not paying attention to what the wife is telling them, through to whatever that might be with regards to healthcare. You can have a revolution. We can revolutionise healthcare if we get IT right. We can build public trust in what it is we're trying to achieve. So at the BCS, we're about trying to make IT good for society, and whatever that means. And sometimes that means making IT good, but I think ultimately it's society to whom we are responsible as a profession.
But you've got to step forward.
Yeah.
Too many of your boards, too much leadership, were CIOs, were leaders, time has gone on.
Yeah.
You've got to step to the front.
Yeah.
It's I've been as part of some of the governance in the BCS, and it's a bit 1980s, some of it. We've really got to see our professional body, as well as us being leaders in their industry, whatever level we are. The professional body's also got to step forward with us. Sometimes it feels that you're trying to catch us up, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And that's the wrong way round. It's the wrong way around. It's got to change.
So on that subject, which is why I brought the IT recruitment subject up actually, because that's something that we're starting a particular campaign on. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that's going to entail?
We are. So I hope Phil will see that we will be doing more and more out in the market. You'll be seeing us tripping over the stuff that we're trying to achieve, certainly around health, certainly around recruitment, the campaign we're going to do around recruitment. And there are others. There's personal data, which is a massive issue, trying to educate society to a certain extent about they're actually the masters of their own personal data, or they should be, and what might that mean, and what could we do with that? And of course, with education, which you've already discussed. One of the great challenges, of course, about working with Phil, with various guises in different organisations over the years, I do feel this pressure on my side, and absolutely that's right. We should be stepping up and answering these questions, and it's my intention not to hide away from it, but to sit next to you in a panel debate such as this and discuss it openly.
We've come to an interesting spot there. There's been a lot of things said that needed to be said. I'm very interested to hear what further feedback we get based on already. We've had a lot on this. I'm just going to show this again to everybody. Lovely, isn't it? Now that is everyone thought this was a dodo. It's not. It's a parrot. It's a skeleton of a parrot. Okay, and you can work out for yourself why that might be. It's not a pterodactyl either. But there's plenty of information there. If you have a look at bcs.org/future-IT-team, you'll see all the pieces from actually a number of the panel members here discussing these issues. There's also quite a lot about the importance of the individual and the fact that individual talent's not being particularly well tapped. To quote a wise man, the capability of an organisation sits solely with the talents, interests, passions, connections, innovations and attitudes of its people. Who was it wrote that? It was Adam.
I think it might be me.
It was indeed. So have a look at that, please, and carry on sending your feedback in. We're interested to get it. Anyone like to make any final comments based on what we've said? Perhaps you feel you've said enough. I don't know. It's been interesting for me.
I'll just say something because obviously I'm in the industry. I've got a reputation and I've got some experience. I think, if my summation of what the articles are about, what this conversation is about, it's only tapping other articles and other conversations, of course. This is not a new thing. The IT department or team or whatever needs to refine itself in any enterprise, any organisation, small, medium or large, public or private. It needs to reflect, and it may reflect after reflection. It may come back and say, no, where we are and what we're doing is right. There's nothing wrong with that either. I suspect that probably won't be the case if it's an honest reflection. I think the challenge from this or anything else you are thinking about if you're an IT leader of any level is to get as close to your business, fulfill and over-fulfill the demands and the money and the investment and the expectation of who you serve. And to the points made earlier, I think IT has a huge future. It just isn't like it was in the past. A perpetuation of the past is wrong. A complete rebirth is probably a bit too dramatic, but a strong evolution done at pace is what businesses we serve really want. IT needs to change. It's really funny. We see ourselves as the change agents, and I find the IT department is the most resistant to change in most organisations, which seems really strange. We really have to grasp that nettle and do it for ourselves.
And looking at the issues here from the perspective of an individual person, it seems to be a very positive message for the individual IT professional that actually we're going to make it much more dynamic for you because you're going to be much more fully involved in the. If you grasp this nettle with the organisation.
I think that's the if, though, isn't it? I think what we're saying is that IT professionals have to up their game, and being good at pushing tin isn't enough anymore. And so you have to get out of the little box you've built for yourself and go and engage in the business and understand where the money that pays you comes from. And I think that's the ultimate challenge to everybody who works in IT. Get your head out of the sand and go and find out how your business works.
I agree. It's a great profession, it's a great industry, but you've got to go and make it different.
Yeah. Well, I had one final comment, which I thought I'd just read to you as a whole little remark, which I thought was a good one. It shows that this is starting to have some traction. I don't usually email in from an article. However, I just read yours in the latest copy of IT Now, and wow, complete eye-opener, ! Glad it's not just me that's finding these problems, and it's more common than I'd have thought. I've got a meeting with my director tomorrow on a couple of matters. However, I think I'll be bringing up the contents of the article as well. So that's a good start. We haven't heard how that meeting went.
That was me that wrote that.
How'd the meeting go?
But, perhaps that member will just send in what happened there. So, Phil, Adam, Louise, Ben, thank you ever so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Brian.
Very much appreciated.